using X-ray diffraction. So today's class, we will mainly focus on the structural characterization. So it means crystal structure. Is my screen visible? Okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you. So X-ray diffractions. X-rays also known as Röntgen rays. William Röntgen invented these X-rays. So when he was dealing with the metal surfaces, bombarding with the electrons, he found that there was a radiation and he couldn't name what, and he named it as X-rays. In mathematics or anywhere, if you don't know anything, we put X. Similar concept was used when the Röntgen ray was invented by William Röntgen. So he didn't know what to name, and he named it X-rays. And in fact, it is a Röntgen rays. The typical wavelength of X-rays are few nanometer or angstroms, very narrow in the electromagnetic spectrum. This is also one of the high energy radiations, maybe next to ultraviolet, before gamma rays, and after ultraviolet radiation. High energetic. Using this, it is possible to arrive at the crystal structure. Or using X-ray diffraction technique, it is possible to arrive crystal structure of any solids, crystalline solids. It may be a metal oxide, alloys, or combination of single oxide, anything. Okay, so if it is a solid and if it is a crystalline material, it is possible to use X-ray diffraction to identify what material it is. There are two distinct approaches in the X-ray diffraction. So one is a conventional powder X-ray diffraction, XRD or PXRD. People call it as a XRD or PXRD. The other one is single crystal X-ray diffraction. That is mostly done by inorganic chemist or organic chemist, protein chemist or people who deal with the proteins, etc. For all others who deal with the metals, metal oxides, alloys, carbon materials, etc., powder XRD is enough. So powder XRD is enough to know what material you have prepared, provided the compound XRD is already known. You will make it as a fingerprint. You make material, take the powder X-ray diffraction, compare with the standard. Okay. So when you give sample for any diagnosis, medical sample or biological sample for any diagnosis, for example, red blood cell or white blood cell or anything as a sample for diagnosis or anything blood. So you get a range of data, right? The range of data for the sample and the reference or the normal sample range also should be available. Then you compare where your health or somebody else or the sample stand, whether it is a normal or abnormal, requires a treatment, etc. So there are known parameters, standard parameters. What parameter for the sample you are getting, you compare, and based on that you proceed for treatment or take care. Similarly, if most of the materials powder X-ray diffraction has been already established, available standards. So if you make a gold X-ray diffraction pattern is already available. Aluminum, nickel, cobalt, most of the element alloys, metal oxides Hundreds of thousands of lakhs of materials standard X-ray diffraction pattern is already established. What you have to do, if you are making some material and if it results in the powder form, you take X-ray diffraction. If it is a crystalline material, it will show some peaks, Bragg peaks. We call it as a Bragg peaks. Then you take these Bragg peaks, compare with the standard XRD patterns. So 20 years before, there used to be a one compact disc. You may not these age people disc. In one compact disc, lakhs of powder X-ray diffraction patterns were embedded, stored. We used to pay 50 rupees and get copied, but these days it is available mostly online. You type in the Google Scholar or anywhere anything X-ray diffraction of nickel, you will get it. X-ray diffraction of titanium oxide, rutile, anatase, brookite, you will get it. But otherwise, there is a professional supply of this compact disc. We used to, our institute used to get from IUCAC, International Union of Applied Crystallography, IUCR. So they used to get and distribute to the student or lab. But these days it is available. The point is, most of the material and their powder X-ray diffraction standard patterns are available. We'll have to only compare and realize what material you have prepared. How to generate X-rays? Emission of X-rays. When you bombard a high energetic electrons on a metal surface, this high energetic electron can kick off the core shell electrons. High energetic electrons or the accelerated electrons, we call it. Accelerated electron, when it is allowed to bombard with the metal surfaces, these accelerated high energy electrons can kick off the core shell electrons. Maybe if you are dealing with copper metal, it will eject 1s orbital, 2s orbital. Or if you are dealing with, for example, molybdenum or any such metals, so the energy of the accelerated electron in such a way that it can kick off the core shell electron. What do I mean by the core shell electron? Core electron, not core, core or core shell or core electron. 1s orbital, K shell, L shell, M shell, N shell, 4 shells are there. Within the K shell, there are 1 orbital, 1s orbital. In L shell, there are 2 orbital, 2s, 2p. So you know those are all fundamentals. Electrons are arranged according to the Haber principle, Hund's rules are followed, etc. Okay. So removing the 1 K shell or 1s orbital is the core level electron or core shell electron. And it is close to the nucleus. To remove that, you require high energy. That's why high accelerated electrons energy is required. So when a beam of accelerated electron is allowed to bombard on the metal surface, it can kick off the core shell electron. What will happen? It will go to the excited state. Okay, it will go to the excited state. For example, here, K shell, L shell, M shell. So when such material, for example, molybdenum, copper, cobalt, iron, chromium, these metals and their characteristic X-ray wavelength being emitted. When you bombard an electron on these metal surfaces, the electron can be removed from this core shell or K shell. What will happen automatically? There will be creation of a hole. The removed electron will go to the excited state somewhere. They will go roam around the globe. But there is a creation of hole. Immediately what happens is the electron in the next higher shell will try to occupy that, will fall into that. When a next shell electron falls onto the core shell to fill that vacancy, a characteristic X-ray wavelength is emitted by the material or the metal. And it is highly characteristic. If you know the wavelength of these X-rays being emitted by any metal, you will be able to know, you will be able to identify what metal it is. For copper, it will emit 1.54 Armstrong wavelength X-rays. If it is a molybdenum, it will emit 0.71 Armstrong wavelength X-ray. Similarly, chromium, iron, cobalt, etc. So this is what happens. You can record this as a spectrum or profile. It will be like this. Okay. So intensity of the the emitted radiation from the metal when the electron falls from the next shell to the core shell, it will emit some radiations. You quantify, you plot the intensity versus the wavelength, and you see there are high intense beams, X-ray beams. One is a K alpha, another one is K beta. What is K alpha, beta? K is a plus spin, beta is a minus spin. That's all. So electron can fall from the higher energy to lower energy, and it can flip, and it can flip, FLIP, flipping, and it can still fall. You have a low energy beta, a low intensity beta. So this is how you generate the X-rays. You will have to create an accelerated electron by applying a very high voltage, 40 kVA, 20 kVA, or 10 kVA to 40 kVA high energy. Accelerate with such a high potential, it will hit at the surface or metal, kick off the core electron, and then to fill the vacancy from the next shell, electron will hop, move, fall. During that, X-rays are emitted, and they are characteristic. X-ray emissions are characteristic. Now you take these X-ray radiations allowed to interact with the sample. Maybe your nanomaterial, gold, silver, platinum, crystal oxide, cobalt oxide, silicon, titanium, polymer, carbon, graphene, carbon nanotube, etc. You believe it or not, when an X-ray is allowed to fall on a specimen, these are the several phenomena it can take place. It can be just observed, material can get heated up. Okay, material might observe the X-rays and get heated up, or it will emit another X-ray, fluorescent. Okay, this is high energy, this may be lower energy, fluorescent, phosphorescent, fluorescent. Or it can scatter, the instant X-rays falling on the sample can be scattered, or it can be diffracted. So this is the intensity that is being governed in X-ray diffraction. You monitor this scattered X-rays intensity or diffracted X-ray intensity, you will get a valuable information. You will be able to get the structure, crystal structure. Okay. Or the electron may be just transmitted. Or these X-rays can lead to emission of radiations, photoelectrons. This is what is being done in solar cells. Instead of X-rays, you allow the normal radiation to fall on the some specimen, that is semiconductor. Then photoelectrons are emitted. That's nothing but current. So depending on the recombination or thing, you can separate it. You'll be able to develop some efficiency. So X-ray diffraction is concerned with the diffracted rays intensities. This is the photograph of a typical diffractometer. So it costs about 50 lakhs to 1 lakh, 1 crore to several crores also, depending on the facilities you require. Minimum 1 crore, a decent X-ray diffraction. So there are 3 such items, such equipments in the Pondicherry University. So you can see that there are components. Okay, I'm not going into the detail. This is the typical X-ray. Sample you require is very minimum. Maybe few milligrams, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams. You can recover it. Non-destructive method of analysis of sample. Best example is X-ray diffraction. Let's see how diffraction takes place. What is the principle? What are the conditions? How we can link this to the characterization of nanostructured materials. Last class we have seen materials can crystallize, or material can exist in 2 forms. Crystalline form non-crystalline form. What are crystalline forms? Crystalline material? What are crystalline material?
The arrangement atoms are
There is
locked
a
in
periodicity
period.
maintained. Periodicity is maintained all along the material. There is a symmetry maintained. Long range order is preserved. You would have read that most of the ionic solids, crystalline ionic solids having crystallinity, they have very large melting point. Very large melting point. This is nothing to do with the topic. I'm just sharing it. Sodium chloride will melt at 700 plus. Similarly, potassium chloride, etc. They are all ionic compound. One reason they have a very high melting point is they have a extended symmetry. To break all those bonds, you require very high energy. Whereas covalent bonds, covalent molecules like water, ammonia, or methane, especially methane, all these things, they are covalent compounds. They can easily be decomposed or it can be easily evaporated, unlike ionic compounds. Okay, so we have two types of material, crystalline material and amorphous material. Crystalline materials, there is a periodicity of the atom, arrangement of atoms, ions are maintained, all the three dimensions, three directions. We have a unit cell to characterize it, which has got all the characteristic or features of a large crystal. And it is quantified alpha, beta, gamma, or A, B, C lattice parameters. In the case of amorphous material, there is no periodicity, random orientation of atoms, ions, or molecules. But still they are also useful. I don't say. So both technologically, both crystalline materials and non-crystalline or amorphous materials are useful. So when I say crystalline materials, there is a arrangement of atoms, ions, or molecules in a periodic manner. In a periodic manner. So it means ions, atoms, or molecules are arranged in their fixed positions. In a fixed, one layer of atoms, ions, another layer of atoms, ions, another layer of atoms, ions, or molecules. It need not be only vertically, maybe it can be any direction dimensions. Okay, but there are atoms, and there is a separation between these two places called interlayer spacing. Assume that this is a layer of atoms. This is another layer of atoms. And there is a definite separation between distance. And this distance is known as interlayer spacing or interlayer distance. Usually it is referred in D spacing. Otherwise, it's also known as D spacing. A collection of D spacing of any material will be able to provide you identification of the material. So in a piece of material, for example, you consider a piece of material, for example, this material. Assume that it is made up of gold or silver, platinum, nickel oxide, titanium oxide, or anything. We have the respective atoms, ions, or molecules. So atoms, ions, molecules are arranged in one layer, another layer, etc. And there is a separation, D-spacing. A collection of these D-spacing for any material will give you identification of the material. You will be able to know what material it is. And this D-spacing can be obtained from X-ray diffraction. X-ray diffraction. Very good tool to get the D-spacing of any material. So a layer of atoms, ions, or molecules arranged, another layer, and there is a distance, D-spacing. So when you allow X-ray radiation to interact with such material, crystalline material, what will happen? There are atoms. Okay, and this is a X-ray, electromagnetic radiation. So definitely there is a scattering of electron will be there. X-ray will be there, or diffraction of X-ray will be there. Assume that there is a beam of X-ray coming up and falling on the metal surfaces or any other material surfaces where we have atoms, ions, or molecules. Okay, so and it scatters or diffracts. Very specifically, diffraction. That's why the name comes diffraction, X-ray diffraction. Okay, so incoming radiation wavelength we know, we must be knowing because X-ray has a definite wavelength. For example, 1.54 in the case of copper. If you are using a copper source, you'll be able to generate 1.54 angstrom wavelength radiation. If you are using molybdenum, it is 0.71. If it is a chromium, 2.21. Popularly used X-ray source is copper. The next is cobalt and iron. There is an X-ray. It is having a wavelength 1.54 and it must also have some intensity. Then it's at the material surfaces and undergoes scattering. What is the difference? So there can be a loss of the intensity. There can be a loss of the intensity because it has interacted with the material surface. It would have transferred some intensity to the material or being lost. Then another ray, this also comes here. And if it can diffract from here, then in that case, it is similar to that. Instead of there, in addition to that, in addition to that, it can also be scattered from the next layer of atomic arrangements, molecular arrangements, ion arrangement, next layer. Maybe will hit at the surface or will hit at B. Then again scattered or diffracted. Same wavelength, same intensity, but intensity of these diffracted radiations will be different. If we can able to detect and quantify the intensity of these diffracted radiations and your job is done, you'll be able to collect X-ray diffraction pattern. Same wavelength before incoming radiation, outgoing radiations, or before diffraction and after radiation. Only difference is intensities are different. You consider this wave or this radiation, it hits at point O and diffracts. Then second ray, it can hit at B and again undergoing diffraction. What is the difference between these two rays, X-rays? I'm sure you'll agree with me. This ray 2 travels an extra path. Ray 2 travels an extra path. How much is the path the second wave ray is traveling? Additional path or extra path traveled by the incoming radiation number 2 marked here. In this diagram. One of you please respond. Additional path it is traveling.
AB plus BC.
AB plus BC, finished. The ray 2 is additionally traveling AB plus B2, BC, AB plus BC. So when you can detect the large intensity of incident radiation, we know because that is what we are allowing to fall on the material, allow them to fall on the material. And intensity of radiation, it depends on whether it is a constructive interference or destructive interference. The detectable intensity you will be able to get if these two rays are having constructive interference. If not, we will not be able to detect the intensity of the scattered or diffracted radiation. You will not be able to get the Bragg peaks. As simple as that. What is in constructive interference and destructive interference? If the wave can be characterized by wavelength, right? They have up and trough. So this hub and a trough, they have if they have a same symmetry, so you will get very high intensity. This can be obtained if the rays are undergoing constructive interference. Otherwise, if they go opposite, the intensity will cancel out. You will not be able to get detectable intensity of the scattered or diffracted radiations. So the ray 2 additionally traveling AB plus B2, in order to have a constructive interference, this is the condition. AB plus BC should be equal to multiples of the wavelength. That is the path difference. So when this path difference is satisfied, we will be able to get a constructive interference and very large intensities of diffracted radiation you can be able to record using some record. So additional distance is AB plus BC, which must be equal to multiples of wavelength. When I say multiples of wavelength, n corresponding to 1, 2, 3, etc. If n equal to 1, first order diffraction. N equal to 2, second order diffraction, etc. Generally, first order diffraction itself enough. Most of the information you can get from first order interaction in diffraction. If not, maybe you can use second order diffraction, third order and all. Intensities are very, very weak. First order intensity itself is enough. Okay. I'm sure in this diagram, you will also agree with me. The AB is equal to BC. Additional distance traveled by the ray 2 is AB plus BC. AB is equal to BC. Then automatically this equation will become n lambda equal to AB plus BC will become n lambda 2AB, because AB equal to BC. AB is equal to BC. And I can construct a right triangle here consisting of OAB, OBC, OAB or OBC. I can construct a right triangle. So there is an incident radiation and interacting with the subsurface material, making some angle theta, making an angle theta. Okay, if this is the theta, this also theta. Okay, so if this is the theta, this also can be a theta. So then I can take this right triangle, OAB, right triangle. In the OAB, OB is what? Despacing, interlayer distance, despacing. This is finished. And this is a right triangle. I can define sine function, cos function, tan function. For simplicity, I will take a sine function. For the right triangle of OAB, as per the Pythagoras theorem, right? So sine theta can be defined as AB by D. AB by opposite side by OB. OB is D, we know. OB is D. Then you take AB this side and ask D to go to that side. You get AB is equal to D sine theta. Now you substitute this AB into this equation, diffraction condition, n lambda equal to 2AB. AB is 2D sine theta. Then this equation will become n lambda equal to 2D sine theta. Or lambda equal to 2D sine theta. And this HKL is the plane. HKL is a plane, Bragg plane, from which the diffraction is taking place. Believe it or not, this condition is known as diffraction condition or Bragg's condition of diffraction, and this equation is known as Bragg's equation. Bragg's equation. This is another version. D is equal to n lambda divided by 2D sine theta, or n lambda equal to 2D sine theta, or lambda equal to 2D sine theta. So what is theta? What is D? D spacing. What is theta? The radiation making the angle with the material. So if we can measure the range of the theta and using this lambda and take the sine function and take first order diffraction, it is possible to estimate range of the d values like this. So generally you measure the 2 theta and take theta from that. Use this Bragg's equation to convert the theta into d spacing, and you will get a profile like this, a pattern like this, which is a plot of intensity of diffracted radiation versus a 2 theta or d spacing. If you know the 2 theta, you can know theta. If you know the theta, using Bragg's equation, it is possible to know d spacing. And you believe it or not, this is the diffraction pattern of aluminum, elemental aluminum. Okay, so whether I take or you take, or if anybody takes the X-ray diffraction of aluminum, you will get such pattern. And this is already known material, and its standard pattern is already established, and you can index it. The first peak is 111, second peak is 200, etc. And compare with the standard. If all the peaks are matching, peak position, 2 theta d value is matching, then you can blindfold and accept the material that you have made is aluminum. This is what you will convert the 2 theta into theta. So you get a range of theta, and that from there it can be converted into d spacing. Then intensity, anyway you can able to record. A plot of intensity versus a 2 theta or d value is known as X-ray diffraction pattern or XRD pattern or powder XRD pattern, since we have dealt with the powder XRD pattern. This collection of d value is a characteristic of some material, any crystalline material, aluminum, cobalt, nickel, titanium oxide, or anything for that matter. You measure the 2 theta, convert them into d spacing, compare with the standard X-ray diffraction. If all the peak positions are matching, it is that material. It is as simple as that. So X-ray diffraction is a non-destructive method. It means you give the sample, get the X-ray diffraction pattern as well as the sample in return without much changes, except some radiation damage may be there. Otherwise, it's not destructive method of analysis, non-destructive. You can recover the sample and reuse it for any other purpose. And relatively very rapid technique. Within 20 minutes, it is possible to identify known material. In worst cases, half an hour. Okay. It is possible to identify compounds or different phases. It is possible to distinguish rutile and anatase brookite. It is possible to distinguish graphene, graphite, carbon nanotube, diamond. It is possible to distinguish in a mixture of carbon and titanium oxide. You will get titanium oxide peak and carbon peak. It is possible to quantify sometimes different phases. If you have a mixture of, for example, platinum and gold, how much platinum, how much gold is there, it is possible to identify and quantify. And mostly it is used for powders and solid samples, including thin films. Very importantly, it is possible to obtain crystallite size. That's where the use of this X-ray diffraction applicable for nanostructured materials. But there are limitations for this equipment, very high price equipment. You need to have very capital expenditure for this. And if the material is having different components, for example, binary mixture is okay, ternary mixture is okay. If several components are added to one solid, and if you try to take the X-ray diffraction and wanted to interpret, it is difficult, complicated X-ray spectrum you will get. So I think I'm done mostly with the XRD. This is the X-ray diffraction pattern of alpha iron. When you take the X-ray diffraction of alpha iron, you will get peaks, these 3 peaks. And this is known material. Know the peak position, compare with the standard. Excuse me. It is possible to identify it is 110. Then this is 220, 200 and 211. This one I didn't elaborate it. I think it would have been very simple, or it is not purpose of this class. So when we say 111 plane, it means this plane. Atoms in these planes are diffracted the X-rays. When it is a 200 plane, it refers to this plane. Atoms present in this plane are diffracted and you get this intensity, peak. And 211 plane refers to this plane. So atoms in this plane are diffracted and you get respective intensity. Similarly for other materials. So now how to identify nanostructured material? So X-ray diffraction pattern or X-ray diffraction technique is very much useful to identify crystallinity or amorphous. It is possible to distinguish whether it is a crystalline sample or amorphous sample. Only crystalline sample will be able to show the Bragg peaks. Amorphous sample will not show the Bragg peaks. It will be a flat parallel to the x-axis. Whereas if you are getting peak, you can be sure that it is a crystalline material. What else you can diagnose using X-ray diffraction? And it is possible to identify whether the material prepared is nanostructure or not. How will you know? You look at the profile of the Bragg peaks. So it is in same intensity versus 2 theta or d value. And you look at the profile. It is not sharp like this. It is not sharp like this. Very sharp. Very sharp. Whereas here, it is broad. It is broad. There is a area inside that. This is the characteristic of nanostructured material. Nanostructured materials will show broad peak in the X-ray diffraction. This is the diagnosis. Peak position may be same, intensity also may be same, but you look at the profile, it is having some area, broadness. It means that nanostructured materials makes the broad X-ray diffraction pattern broad. There is a reason for that. There is a reason for that. Because again, we have to go to first unit. When we move from bulk to nano, there are number of atoms decreasing. Number of atoms are decreasing. Lesser number of atoms. Lesser the number of atoms, lower the diffraction undergoing. Lesser the number of atoms, lesser the intensity of the diffracted intensity. So it looks like broadened. So this is the standard pattern. Okay, so there is an identification number. I don't know how much you will appreciate it. Maybe as you grow, you will appreciate. So you take the aluminum oxide X-ray diffraction and see their position and intensity and compare with the standard pattern. This is the standard pattern. If all these peak positions match, it is aluminum oxide. More on peak profile and identification of the non-structured materials. So X-ray diffraction is very much a tool to characterize the solids, whether it is gold, silver, platinum, carbon, graphene, carbon nanotube, etc. In addition to that, it is also possible to identify whether the prepared material is nanostructured or not. Yes, it is possible. Because nanostructured material shows peak broadening. Bragg peaks are broadened due to less number of atoms, ions, molecules undergoing diffraction. Of course, this peak broadening also may be due to some error. Broadening due to defect in the material, broadening due to instrument problem, or if you are taking X-ray diffraction of solid solution, alloys, etc., if there is an inhomogeneity, okay, due to some reasons, it might show broadening. If all these three are taken care, if you still see the broadened wide Bragg peaks, it is due to nanosize effect. This is the diagnosis. Highly broad. You will not get such a broadness for commercial material or conventional bulk material. You will get sharp peak. To add to that, using this broadened X-ray diffraction peak or Bragg peaks, it is possible to estimate the crystallite size. Another use of XRD for characterizing nanostructured material. You will be able to identify the crystallite size using this standard equation known as Debye-Scherrer equation. Debye-Scherrer equation, simply known as Scherrer equation. Okay, Scherrer equation or Debye-Scherrer equation. So the final version of this equation, L is equal to 0.9 lambda divided by beta cos theta. 0.9 equal to, size, crystallite size in angstrom is equal 0.9 lambda divided by beta cos theta. I think I should be having a better equation. Yeah, here. So L is equal 0.9 lambda divided by beta cos theta. This is the average crystallite size in angstrom. 0.9 some constant. Lambda is the wavelength of X-ray that you have used, 1.54 if it is a copper, 0.79 if it is a molybdenum, etc. And theta is this. We have seen this intensity versus diffraction angle. This is the 2 theta, you take theta. Then beta is full width at top maximum. Full width at half of this maximum. FWHM, simply known as FWHM, is nothing but full width at top maximum. So this is a peak, complete peak. Okay. So there is a peak position, there is an intensity will not bother. Peak position, from there you get to theta. How to get beta? So this is the full intensity. Half of this intensity is somewhere here. Then connect to the x-axis. Take the difference, 43.47 minus 43.22, 0.25. This is 2 theta. Divide by 2, you get 0.25 degrees. Then beta should be expressed in radians. 0.125 degree into 3.142 divided by 180, you'll be able to convert degree into radians. Please remember, beta should be taken in radians. Then only there is a meaning for this equation. Then substitute lambda, cos theta, and beta. You'll be able to get the crystallite size. Crystallite size. Crystallite size. So the the Bragg peaks are broad. That itself shows it's a nanostructured material. You will see what is the crystallite size. It is different from the particle size, grain size. I am coming to that later. You can take down this numerical problem. When a gold nanopowder was subjected to X-ray XRD using copper K alpha radiation, having the wavelength 1.5418 angstrom, the 111 peak was centered at 38.37 with the full width at top maximum 0.012 degree. Estimate the gold crystallite size. Please take down this problem. This is the difference between crystallite size and the particle size. This is whole particle and it's a size. Within the particle, there may be several crystallites. Within the crystallites, there is a single orientation like domain size we have seen in the case of magnetic properties of nanostructured materials. Within particles or grain, there may be a several crystallite size. Within the crystallite size, there will be a one orientation. It may be 111 plane or 211 plane or any other Bragg planes. So there is a difference between the crystallite size and particle size. Very important question. When you go for interview related to materials, nanomaterial characterization, people will definitely ask this question. What is the difference between crystallite size and particle size, grain size? Particle size and crystallite sizes are not same. They are different. One order difference will be there. For example, this is whole particle, but this is a crystal. This is a whole particle, but this is a crystallite size. One order, sometimes difference may be there. So, you have been given X-ray diffraction of a gold corresponding to the 111 peak, where it is centered 38.37, 2 theta. Divide by 2, you'll be able to get theta. What is the full width at top maximum? It is already given here, full width at top maximum. You can take any intensity, any Bragg peak, but the highest intensity we will take usually. So full width at top maximum is 0.102 degree. It should be converted into radians. How? Multiply by pi by 180. 3.142 divided by 180 degree will become radians. You know lambda 1.5418 angstrom. You know now theta 38.37 divided by 2. You know the full width at top maximum 0.102 into pi by 180, so many radians. Use this Debye-Scherrer equation 0.9 lambda divided by beta cos theta. You know lambda, beta you know, theta you know, estimate L, you will get L, that is crystallized size in angstrom. One order take less, it will be narrow. Very, very fascinating equipment or technique to characterize the materials, very specifically nanostructured materials. And it is also possible to distinguish a mixture. In a mixture, for example, if it contains nickel and nickel oxide, it is possible to distinguish using X-ray diffraction. Someone has done, my student has done long back, 5 years back. He has made a mixture of nickel oxide by changing the concentration of nickel nitrate and citric acid. When he has used 1:1 citric acid, nickel nitrate, you could get nickel along with the nickel oxide. But when you increase it to 1:8 ratio, you could get only nickel oxide. So you'll be able to distinguish a mixture that contains one or two or more components. So the take-home point from the X-ray diffraction is X-ray diffraction is a apt tool to characterize solids provided the solid is crystalline nature. Whether it is a single crystalline or polycrystalline, multicrystalline, that is different. Then we'll move to spectroscopic characterization. I told you the other day there are several spectroscopic techniques are there. They can also provide structure or the feature of the material or molecule. So here is another one popular spectroscopic, simple and popular, UV visible spectroscopy. Absorption spectroscopy, also known as absorption spectroscopy, simply known as UV visible. So forget about all these things, how it can be done. So yeah, UV light and visible light should be generated. It should be made as a monochromatic radiation, then allowed to fall on the sample. For a reference intensity, you have a reference, then deduct the intensity of the radiation that is coming out of the sample, then you quantify, plot intensity versus absorption. If you are getting a peak, that material is absorbed something. If it is a semiconductor, so this absorption is due to electronic transition we have seen in the first unit. We have a valence band and a conduction band. When you illuminate with the radiation, if the energy of the illuminated radiation is having the energy equal to the band gap, electron will go to the excited state. When it comes, it will emit radiations. You can measure both absorption radiation and the emission radiations. Okay, so we have a direct band gap and indirect band gap. If it is not a semiconductor, if it is a molecule, so that electronic transition within the orbitals can take place. You have seen, so the emitted color is the color wheel it gives. There should be allowed a transition, forbidden transition, etc. This we have seen it already. This is the absorption profile of cadmium telluride. As the reaction progresses, there is a change in the absorption maximum and also the intensity. And the intensity of emitted radiation is generally high. That's what we call it as a quantum fluorescence in the case of semiconductor. We have seen in the first unit. This is for cadmium selenide absorption profile. I have already shown you in the first unit. It is possible to estimate the band gap using X-ray UV visible spectroscopy. You make a range of colloid, nanocolloid having different sizes. You take the absorption profile, use Planck's equation H equal to HC by E equal to HC by lambda. You know the lambda and others are constant. Use 1240 divided by lambda. You'll be able to get band gap. In that way, you can use a spectroscopic technique to characterize the nanostructured materials. What if the sample is a solid? If it is a colloid or solution, it is possible to take the use of absorption spectroscopy. And if it is a semiconductor, you can know the band gap. If it is a metal, you will get the SPR band, surface plasma resonance band. What if the sample is not solid? If it is a solid, if not, if it is liquid. Even for the solids, you can take UV spectrum. Here we don't call it as an absorption spectrum, but reflectance spectrum, UV reflectance spectrum. So you get the intensity versus the same wavelength. Excuse me. You get the same profile. Now there is an equation called Tauc equation. This is the Tauc equation and the rearranged Tauc equation, which connects the excuse me, band gap versus this quantity absorbance. You transform this UV spectrum into Tauc plot and extrapolate to the x-axis. Where in the x-axis where it touches will give you the band gap. So depending on the direct band gap for semiconductor, indirect band gap semiconductor, this n can change. So accordingly, you can use it. So UV spectroscopy is also useful in characterizing nanostructured materials. Similar to X-ray diffraction. X-ray spectroscopy is different. X-ray diffraction, and that this was UV visible spectroscopy. For solutions or colloids, you can directly get the band gap. Emission frequency, absorption frequency. Use absorption frequency to quantify the band gap. If it is a solid, same UV spectrum, but now use the Tauc equation and Tauc plot. I'm sure many of you will do this Tauc plot in mini project or major project. Even this also extensively you will do, I'm sure. So then comes infrared spectroscopy, simply known as IR spectroscopy. So assume that you are preparing titanium oxide nanostructured materials by chemical synthesis or biological method or any other method using some precursors. Let's assume for simplicity you are making by chemical synthesis. How will you make gold titanium oxide chemical synthesis? You will have to take TEOS, Sol-Gel method, tetraethoxysilane. Then you carefully add little amount of water or a mixture of water and solvent. Then you get a gel, dry it, you get a titanium oxide particles. What was the starting material? Titanium alkoxide. So what is the end product you want to get? Titanium oxide. Then where will this alkoxide moieties will go? It will stay there. It will be absorbed. It may be partially decomposed or absorbed. To know the adsorbed species on the material, you can use infrared spectroscopy. So when I say adsorbed species on the sample, it need not be only the carbon or decomposed product. It can be adsorbed water also. It can be adsorbed CO also. It can be adsorbed NO also. Any adsorbed functional groups can be diagnosed, can be confirmed using infrared spectroscopy. So if you ask me, I need to have all the three data. In addition to that, morphological characterization also required to identify, to characterize the material. So this is the X-ray diffraction pattern, UV spectrum, IR spectrum, this is morphology. All these four techniques are required to completely understand the nanostructural characterization. Very specifically, I would like to highlight this IR spectroscopy and Raman spectroscopy. They are complementary to each other. Is very much useful in characterizing amorphous materials. We know what is amorphous material now. They don't maintain the periodicity of the symmetry. They maintain only short range order. Long range order they don't maintain. Only crystalline materials they maintain the long range order. So when you take the X-ray diffraction of amorphous material, you will not get peak like this. You will get only flat curve. No peak will be there because there is no atoms in their suitable place to scatter or diffract. You won't get the peak because atoms are randomly arranged. Only in the crystalline materials, atoms, ions, molecules are arranged in a periodic manner, symmetric manner. You get a significant intensity of the diffracted radiation, quantify it, convert into theta, and despacing, etc. How will you confirm if it is an amorphous material where you get a very flat X-ray diffraction profile? So you can use infrared spectroscopy and Raman spectroscopy to complement that. Okay. So this is what you can get: adsorbed species, functional group, many information, material adsorbed on the surface, you can get it. I think this one comparison it will give a better information. I told you that Raman and IR are complement each other. Okay. So you will get nearly same feature, or the one you miss in IR will be able to get in Raman, and vice versa. So we have prepared very recently silicon oxide nanostructures. Silicon oxide nanostructure. Then we went for X-ray diffraction. What we should get, if it is a crystalline material, we should get a silicon oxide peaks, Bragg peaks. Unfortunately, we could get only one peak. I don't know whether we have it here or not. Maybe I don't have here. We got only one peak. So I told you that a collection of d-spacing is characteristic of a material. If I have only one d-spacing, how will I confirm whether that peak is coming for the silicon oxide or anything else? How do I know? If I have several peaks, then it can constitute the X-ray diffraction pattern. Then I can compare with the standard pattern and know what material it is. If I have only one Bragg peak, it is difficult to identify, difficult to reliable with one diffraction pattern. So it means that material is amorphous. If you don't get peak or you don't get significant peak, material is amorphous. Raman spectroscopy and IR spectroscopies are very much useful technique to characterize the non-crystalline materials, that is amorphous material. Or the short range order associated with the material can be characterized, identified using Raman spectroscopy and IR spectroscopy. Now, this is the Raman profile, Raman spectrum of silicon oxide. You get 3-4 peaks, and this is characteristic. Instead of relying with one single Bragg peaks, you can very much rely with 3 Raman profile Raman shapes. And you can see that similar position IR also will show. And this IR and Raman spectroscopy is very much useful to distinguish carbon nanotube graphene from that of the graphite. Here is a graphene X-ray diffraction. So graphite, as in the Raman spectrum, so of course, if it is a graphite or graphene or any other carbon material, if it is a crystalline, it will show some peak in the X-ray diffraction. Many times they don't show peak. It means that it is an amorphous material, graphene or carbon nanotube or graphite, even for that matter. If it is not a crystalline material, it will not show any Bragg peaks in the infrared in the X-ray diffraction. How do we know? You have to go for IR and Raman. And Raman spectroscopy will give you much better information. You get such peaks, and you know the intensity of these things. These 2 peaks: defect peak, graphitic peak. Graphene has got 2 Raman ships, one corresponding to graphitic peak, G band. Another one is defect, D band. Okay, and in addition, if you are getting such peaks, it is a graphene. In addition to that, you note the intensity ratio, ID by IG. If it is closer to 1, blindfold and accept it's a graphene material. If it is large difference, it is a graphite. Layer is not separated. Very good tool. So the take-home point is X-ray diffraction is a very much tool to characterize solid materials. IR spectroscopy, UV visible spectroscopy, and Raman spectroscopy are also useful in characterizing the nanostructured materials. Very specifically, IR and Raman can be used to characterize amorphous material. UV visible spectroscopy will be able to provide band gap of the material, SPR band of the metals, metal nanocolloids. And it is possible to know even the non-crystalline sample by infrared or IR spectroscopy. XRD may not be useful in that case. So I'm done with the structural characterization and spectroscopy characterization. I'm a little bit fast because I don't have time. I'm afraid that I may be left with some portion not thought. So that's why I'm hurrying. Kindly pardon me. So thank you very much. If you have any comments, clarifications, you can raise.